There's something about the dark that makes certain thoughts louder. Not the dramatic ones, not the ones you'd expect. The quiet ones. The ones that have been sitting in the back of your throat for so long you've almost forgotten they're there. Until they're not. Until something shifts. And suddenly you're lying still at whatever hour this is, and the thought is just there. Right there. Taking up all the air. You know that feeling when you find out something that changes the shape of a person you thought you knew? When the version of them you were holding, the one you trusted, the one you maybe loved, just doesn't quite fit anymore? And you're standing there with both versions in your hands, and neither one feels real, and you don't know what you're supposed to do with that. That's where tonight lives. Not one story, three. Three people who found out something they couldn't unknow, who had to decide what to do with the truth someone else had been keeping for them, without their permission. We're not here to judge anyone. We're here because sometimes the only way to carry something is to finally put it down somewhere and let someone else look at it with you. So, let's look. The smell of his apartment was coffee and cedar and something else I never quite named. Something warm, like old paperbacks left in the sun. I used to think that smell was just him. The way some people carry their own atmosphere wherever they go. Marcus had that. He walked into a room and the room adjusted. We'd been together almost 2 years when I found the bottle. I wasn't snooping. I want to be clear about that. I was looking for ibuprofen. I had a headache that had been sitting behind my left eye since noon. Marcus was in the shower, and I opened the medicine cabinet the way you open someone's medicine cabinet when you've been with them long enough that their bathroom is just a room you're in. Without thinking, without ceremony. The bottle was orange, ordinary looking. His name was on the label. But it wasn't ibuprofen, and when I looked at the date it had been prescribed, I had to read it twice. Then a third time, because the date was 14 months ago, and we'd been together for 22. You have to understand what we were, before that moment. What I thought we were. We had a rule. Not a stated rule, nothing we'd ever sat down and agreed to, but a felt rule, the kind that lives in the bones of a relationship before it lives in any conversation. The rule was, we don't protect each other from hard things. We'd built that, deliberately. I told him about the scare I had with my own health 2 years before we met, something that had turned out to be nothing but had taken 3 months and a lot of sleepless nights to confirm. He'd held that story carefully. I'm glad you told me. I'm glad you don't carry things alone. I believed him. Tuesday nights we always got Thai food from the place on Clement Street. Same order every time, because Marcus said the menu was overwhelming and once you found a thing that worked, why complicate it? He'd get the green curry, I'd get the noodles, and we'd eat on the floor because the couch was too far from the coffee table, and neither of us had ever bothered to fix that. Small, ridiculous, perfect. The kind of ritual that feels like nothing until it feels like everything. He remembered how I took my coffee. He remembered which side of the bed I needed to sleep on. He remembered the name of my third-grade teacher because I'd mentioned her once, in passing, and he'd filed it away like it mattered. That was Marcus. That was the man I thought I knew the shape of. He came out of the shower while I was still standing there holding the bottle. Nadia. Just my name, like a sentence. I held the bottle up, not accusatory. I don't think I was capable of accusatory in that moment. I was still somewhere before the feeling had a name. What is this? How long have you known? A while. A while. I remember the word landing strange, too soft for what it was carrying. Marcus. I sat down next to him, not close, just in the same room, on the same surface. Talk to me. I didn't want it to change how you looked at me. He said it to his hands, not to me. I didn't want to be that to you. I wanted to just be Marcus for a little while longer. I sat with that. I sat with it for what felt like a long time. That night I slept on my side of the bed facing the wall. I don't know if he slept at all. I don't know because I didn't ask and he didn't say. And the silence between us was a different kind of silence than any we'd had before. Not comfortable. Not the silence of two people who don't need to fill the air. The silence of two people who have run out of the right words and are afraid of using the wrong ones. In the morning, he made coffee. My order, the way I take it. And I stood in the kitchen watching him do this thing he'd done 100 times, this small act of memory and care. And I thought, which parts were real? Not cruelly. I wasn't trying to undo him. I just genuinely couldn't tell anymore where the love ended and the concealment began, whether they were two separate things or whether they'd been braided together so long they couldn't be pulled apart. I went home that afternoon. I needed my own air, my own walls. The days after that were strange and slow. We talked, more than we ever had actually in some ways, but the talking felt effortful in a way it never had before. Like we were both translating from a language we used to share fluently and now had to think about. He wasn't wrong that it changed how I looked at him. He'd known it would. That's why he hadn't told me. And there's something almost unbearably sad about that logic. This preemptive grief he'd carried alone, protecting himself from a loss that hadn't happened yet, and in doing so, making it more likely to happen. I understood it. I understood it more than I wanted to. But understanding something and being okay with it aren't the same thing. I'm still learning that. You know that feeling when you realize you've been living inside a version of something that wasn't entirely real? Not fake, not performed, not malicious, just incomplete in a way that changed the shape of everything? And you go back through it all, trying to figure out which moments were full and which ones had something missing from the center. I keep going back to that walk along the waterfront. The first date. The 2 hours that neither of us wanted to end. He knew then. He was already carrying it then. And the thing I can't stop sitting with, the thing I haven't been able to say to anyone who knows both of our names, is that I don't know if knowing would have changed anything. I don't know if I would have walked away, or leaned in closer, or just held his hand a little differently on that waterfront in the dark. I'll never know. Because he didn't give me the chance to find out. And that's the part that stays. There's something that stays with you after a story like that. Not anger exactly. More like the specific ache of realizing someone looked at you every day and decided again to say nothing. Silence as a choice, that's what that was. You know what's strange about honesty, though? It doesn't always land the way we imagine it will. We tell ourselves that if someone just tells us, if they find the words, if they sit down, if they look us in the eye and say the thing, that we'll know what to do with it. That the truth, at least, gives us something solid to stand on. And then someone tells you the truth. And you're still standing in the exact same place, holding something you don't know how to hold, trying to figure out what you're supposed to do next. That's where we're going. There's this thing Eli did every single night. Didn't matter if I got home at 6 or at 11:30 after a double shift, the porch light was always on. Because he stayed up, every time, reading or watching something with the volume low or just sitting there with his tea gone cold on the coffee table. And when I'd come through the door, he'd look up like he'd been waiting for exactly that moment. Not in a needy way, in the way of someone who just genuinely liked it when I walked into the room. That's the thing I keep coming back to. We'd been together 2.5 years when it happened. Long enough that I knew how he took his coffee. 1 sugar, splash of oat milk, always stirred counterclockwise, which I told him was insane and he said was efficient. Long enough that I knew which silences were comfortable and which ones meant something was sitting heavy on him. Long enough that I thought I knew the shape of him. Our apartment was small. 3rd floor of an old building in Columbus, the kind where the radiator made sounds like it was solving a personal problem and the windows let in just enough draft in November that you spent a lot of time under blankets. We had a kitchen table we'd bought at an estate sale that was slightly too big for the space, and we ate every dinner at it anyway. Knees almost touching. Eli always sat with his back to the window because he said the light hit my face better from that side. I used to roll my eyes at that. I miss rolling my eyes at that. He was a graphic designer. Freelance, which meant his schedule was weird and unpredictable, which meant sometimes I'd come home and dinner was already on the stove, and sometimes I'd come home and he'd be deep in a project, headphones on, completely unreachable. But even then, even on the deep work nights, he'd pull one headphone off when I walked in. just to say hey, just to make sure I knew he knew I was there. I loved him for a lot of things, but I think I loved him most for the small, consistent ones. The porch light, the counterclockwise stirring, the one headphone. It was a Thursday in February. I remember that specifically because it had been a genuinely bad week at work, the kind of week where every day felt like running uphill. And Thursday was the night I finally let myself exhale a little. I'd picked up wine on the way home, the cheap kind we both liked, and I came through the door, already looking forward to the couch, the blanket, the nothing. Eli was at the kitchen table. Not working. Just sitting. Which was unusual. He was almost never just sitting. I put the wine down and said something like, "Hey, you okay?" Casual, the way you say it when you're not really worried yet. And he looked up at me with this expression I didn't have a name for. Not sad exactly. Something older than sad. "I need to tell you something." And just like that, the exhale I'd been saving all week turned into something I was holding. I sat down across from him, the kitchen table that was too big for the room. Knees almost touching. He didn't start right away. He turned his mug around in his hands a few times. He does that when he's nervous, just rotates it like he's winding something up. There's stuff about before that I haven't talked about. Before us. Before Columbus, really. And I think you should know. I said, okay. I said it too quickly, probably. The way you say, okay, when you're already bracing. What came out over the next hour, I don't know how to compress it into something clean, because it wasn't clean. It was the opposite of clean. It was him talking in starts and stops, circling something, and then landing on it. There had been a period, years before we met, where he had been in a really dark place. A long stretch of it. The kind of dark where he almost didn't make it through. And he said that part quietly, like a fact he'd gotten used to but still handled carefully. And in that period he'd made choices. Not just about himself. There had been a relationship before me, before any of this. And he had not been. His word was good. I was not good to her. I was in a bad place and I took that out on someone who didn't deserve it. And I have spent a long time trying to understand that. He wasn't crying. I almost wished he was. It would have been easier to hold on to if he was crying. I asked him what not good meant. I heard myself ask it and I remember thinking, that's not the right question, or maybe it's the only question. And he answered it. Not with graphic detail. But honestly, there had been control. Jealousy that went further than jealousy. A version of him that he described like a stranger he used to be. My hands were flat on the table. I don't know when I put them there. Why are you telling me now? And the question came out more like an accusation than I meant it to. And I knew it immediately. And I watched him absorb it. Because I almost told you 100 times. And because I'm not that person anymore. And because I need you to decide if you believe that. Not me. You. The room felt smaller. That's the only way I can describe it. Like the walls had taken one step in. I didn't say anything for a long moment. Long enough that he started to say my name, Nora, and I held up one hand. Not to stop him. Just to ask for a second. And in that second, I sat there with the cheap wine on the counter, and the radiator working through its problems, and the man I loved across from me, waiting. And I thought, I don't know what to do with this. You know that feeling when someone tells you something and you smile and nod and say the right words, but somewhere underneath, a door just closed? Not slammed. Not locked. Just swung shut, quietly, and now you're standing on one side of it trying to figure out if you can open it again. That was that night. I told him I needed some time to think. Of course. We went to bed on opposite sides of a silence that neither of us knew how to fill. And I lay there in the dark, listening to him breathe and thinking about how strange it was, how completely strange, that the same lungs I'd fallen asleep next to 1,000 times could suddenly feel unfamiliar. The next morning he got up before me and made coffee. 1 sugar, splash of oat milk, counterclockwise. He left mine on the nightstand without waking me, the way he always did on my late shift days. And when I finally got up and came into the kitchen, he was already at his desk with his headphones on, and I stood there holding the mug, still warm. And I didn't know whether to feel loved or to feel like I was looking at something I'd been looking at wrong the whole time. I almost brought it up again that afternoon. He was in the kitchen making lunch, and I was sitting at the table, and there was a moment where he turned around and saw my face, and I could tell he knew exactly what I was thinking. He always could. And he just waited. Didn't push. Didn't fill the silence with reassurance. I looked away first. I said, "Do you want me to cut the bread?" "Yeah, please." And we ate lunch. And neither of us said anything about it. That evening I was sitting by the window after he'd gone to bed. Couldn't sleep, just watching the street. And I thought about the person he'd described. The stranger version. And then I thought about the man asleep in the next room who left the porch light on every night without being asked. And I couldn't, I still can't, make those two things sit comfortably next to each other. I don't know if they ever will. Here's what I keep turning over. People change. I believe that. I think I have to believe that, or the whole world becomes something I can't stand inside of. But believing it in the abstract is different from living inside the specific. From lying next to the specific. From loving the specific. I don't know if you've ever loved someone whose past scared you. But if you have, you know exactly what I mean. It's not that the love goes away. It's that it gets complicated by something that wasn't there before, and you have to figure out how to hold both things at once, and nobody tells you how heavy that is. Some nights I still come home and the porch light is on, and I still feel something when I see it. I'm just not always sure anymore what that something is. There's something that stays with you after a story like that. Not the anger. The anger makes sense. The anger is clean. It's the other thing. The quieter thing. The question of what someone knew and when and why they decided that keeping it to themselves was something they could live with. We tell ourselves that silence is neutral, that not saying something isn't the same as doing something. But I don't know if I believe that anymore. I think sometimes silence is a decision. A whole, deliberate, considered decision, dressed up to look like nothing. And the person on the other side of it pays the price. The next person who wrote to us, they were a child when it happened, what was done to them, and for a long time they thought they were alone in it. They weren't. Someone knew. Someone who had the authority to say something, to do something, to make it stop. Knew. And went home anyway. There's a plant on my desk that Margaret gave me. It's a pothos, one of those trailing green things that can survive almost anything. She brought it in on my third week, set it down next to my monitor without making a big deal of it, and said, "These are impossible to kill. I figured you could use something that was impossible to kill." I didn't know what she meant by that yet. I thought she was just being kind. I thought she was just the kind of person who brought plants to new employees. I watered it this morning. I don't know why I keep doing that. The job was at a mid-sized property management company. We handled residential buildings, leases, maintenance requests, tenant complaints, nothing glamorous. The office smelled like burnt coffee and that specific brand of carpet cleaner they use in buildings that were renovated in 2003 and never again. There were 8 of us in the main office, a break room with a mini fridge that hummed too loud, and a whiteboard in the hallway where someone had written, "Team equals together everyone achieves more," in blue marker, and never erased it. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand the smallness of it, the ordinariness. I want you to understand that I was not in some high-stakes environment. I was in a place with a humming mini fridge and motivational whiteboard typography, and I still needed it to be safe, and for a while, I believed it was. I'd come from somewhere that wasn't safe. I'll leave it at that. What happened to me before that job, in a place that was supposed to be professional with a person who was supposed to be trustworthy, I'd spent a long time trying to put it somewhere quiet inside myself. I wasn't okay for a while. I want to be honest about that without making this about the details, because the details aren't the point. The point is that I arrived at that property management company with a particular kind of hunger. The hunger of someone who has been in the cold for too long and will notice every single source of warmth. Margaret was the warmth. She was the regional director, 50-something. Reading glasses she was always losing on top of her own head. A laugh that started somewhere in her chest and arrived late, like it had taken its time getting there. She had a way of stopping in the middle of the office floor and actually asking how you were. Not the "how are you" that's really just "hello," but the kind where she'd tilt her head slightly and wait. Actually wait. She remembered things. She remembered that I'd mentioned my sister's wedding in passing and asked about it 3 weeks later. She remembered that I took my coffee with oat milk because I'd mentioned once, that regular milk made me feel sick. She left a sticky note on my monitor one Friday afternoon that just said, "Good week, you should know that." And I kept it. I kept it in my desk drawer for almost a year. I had worked for people who used their authority like a weather system, something you watched and tried to predict and mostly tried to survive. Margaret used hers like a door she kept open. I trusted her the way you trust something that's never given you a reason not to, which is to say, completely. Which is to say, without really deciding to, because it felt like breathing. The Tuesday it happened was ordinary. I need you to know that. It was a regular Tuesday in October. The fluorescent light above the copier was doing its flicker thing, and I was walking back from the break room with a mug that said, "But first coffee," in that font that was everywhere in 2017. I almost didn't hear it. The door to Margaret's office was open maybe 4 inches. Not enough to see in, but enough to hear if you were walking past slowly, which I was, because I was reading something on my phone. I heard her voice, and another voice. Denny's voice. Denny was our HR coordinator. He'd been there 11 years. He kept protein bars in his desk and spoke in a way that was always careful, always slightly measured, like he was perpetually aware he might be quoted. She's been here, 8 months now? And she seems good, settled. She is. She's doing really well. I always wondered if she knew we knew. Knew we knew. My brain did this thing, this protective stalling thing, where I thought, they're talking about someone else. There are 8 people in this office. They're talking about Priya or Keisha or the new temp whose name I could never remember. My brain offered me every other option before it offered me the real one. And then Margaret said quietly, in a voice I had never heard from her before, lower, like something she was setting down carefully. I hope so. I hope she's just been able to move on. And I knew. You know that feeling when you're watching a movie and you suddenly realize you've misread the whole thing? The character you thought was one thing is something else entirely. And the scene you're watching is the same scene you've been watching. But now it means something completely different. And your body understands before your mind catches up. And there's this sick, sliding feeling. Like the floor is the same floor, but it isn't. That's what happened in that hallway. With a mug that said, "But first coffee," standing on carpet that smelled like 2003, I walked back to my desk. I sat down. I put the mug down too hard and a little bit of coffee came over the side and I watched it happen and did nothing about it. I opened a lease renewal document and stared at it. The words didn't move. I kept thinking, how long have they known? How long have they known? How long have they known? Like a skip in a record. Like something my brain needed to repeat until it became information instead of just sound. Because if they knew, if Margaret knew, then she had known when she brought me the plant. She had known when she left the sticky note. She had known when she stopped in the middle of the office floor and tilted her head and waited. She had known the whole time. And she had said nothing. Done nothing. Just watched me settle in, watched me water the plant, watched me become someone who felt safe. I went home that night and sat on my bathroom floor for about 40 minutes. I'm not going to make that more dramatic than it was. I wasn't in crisis. I was just in the only room in my apartment where I felt like the walls were close enough. Sometimes you need the walls close. I kept turning it over, kept trying to find the angle where it looked different. Maybe she was protecting me. Maybe she thought bringing it up would undo everything I'd worked to put quiet. Maybe silence was a kindness she was offering me. I tried that on. I really did. But here's the thing about that. She never asked me. She never gave me the choice. She decided, from behind her open door and her reading glasses and her chest laugh, that I didn't need to know that she knew. She decided that for me. And the person who does that, even gently, even with good intentions, is still making a decision about what you can handle without consulting you about it. That's not protection. That's just a quieter kind of control. I still work there. I want you to sit with that for a second because I'm still sitting with it. I still work there, and Margaret is still the regional director, and on Thursday morning she still does her round of the office floor and stops and tilts her head and asks how everyone is doing. And when she gets to my desk I say, "Good, keeping busy." And she smiles and moves on, and I watch her go, and I feel two things at exactly the same time, and I have not yet figured out how to make them take turns. One of them is grief, because I miss her. I miss who I thought she was, or maybe I miss who she actually was in all the moments that were real. And I think most of them were real. I think the plant was real. I think the sticky note was real. But real kindness and real failure can live in the same person, and knowing that doesn't make either one smaller. The other thing is anger, but it's not the clean kind. It's not the kind you can do anything with. It's the kind that just sits in your chest during Thursday morning check-ins and asks, "What exactly were you protecting? Me or yourself?" I don't have an answer. I don't think she does either. I think she made a choice that felt like mercy and didn't look far enough down the road to see what it would cost me when I found out. I think she lives comfortably inside that choice. I think she sleeps fine. I think that might be the thing I'm least able to forgive. The pothos is still on my desk. It's gotten longer since March. Those trailing vines, you have to kind of redirect them or they'll just go wherever there's light. I've wound one of the longer ones around the edge of my monitor. It looks intentional. It looks like I planned it that way. I didn't. I've been thinking a lot lately about the difference between surviving something and understanding it. About how you can do the first one for years before the second one catches up to you. About how the thing that finally cracks you open isn't always the original harm. Sometimes it's the discovery of who was standing nearby, watching, saying nothing. Saying, "I hope she's been able to move on." A quiet exhale. I keep asking myself, move on from what, Margaret? From what happened to me, or from finding out that you knew? Because those are two different things now, and I'm only finished with one of them. I always need a little longer after one like this. Not because any single piece of it was too much, but because all three of them landed at once. And I just sat with that for a second. If you've ever had a week where trust didn't just crack but collapsed, where you looked around and realized the people who were supposed to be safe had been making quiet decisions about your life without you, you don't need me to explain what that weight feels like. You already know it somewhere in your chest. I let out a slow breath when this one came in, the kind you don't realize you've been holding. Because here's the thing that stays with me. None of these were accidents. They were choices. Someone always knew, and they chose the silence. I don't know what you do with that. I'm not sure any of us do. Maybe that's the hardest part of learning who someone really is, realizing they already knew who you were and decided it didn't matter enough. If any of this is sitting close to home right now, you don't have to carry it alone. Drop it in the comments. We read them. Confessed, new stories when they're ready.